Achieving your financial freedom is something that's really close to my heart. Not because money is everything, but because achieving financial freedom gives you the freedom to do what you want when you want it. Financial freedom often requires investment, and investment is inherently risky. And at the moment it's particularly risky because the markets are all over the place. So this is a two-part series. In the first part, I'm going through why I think the market's particularly peculiar at the moment and the conflicts within them. So having analysed the problem, the second part is what we do to protect ourselves given the problems that there are. So let's get cracking with the first part. The idea for this video came about when I got a letter from the bank and they told me that the first £85,000 of what I have in the bank is protected and the rest isn't. And as normal, I sort of briefly looked at the letter and chucked it in the bin, and that's sort of what I thought they were expecting me to do. But it just got me thinking, they're always sending out these letters. You're only allowed to have £85,000 in the bank, and then it's not protected. And it just got me to think, you know, why do they keep on sending this? To understand the current situation, you've got to go back 10 years and maybe more to understand how things have been building up. And I think that one of the most important things is to look at money printing. So money printing, or quantitative easing as they call it, is not money printing as in with a printing press, it's electronic money printing where they create money out of thin air. I think it's important to understand the scale because they say it's so many billion. I think it's £435 billion. Well, what does that mean? It means nothing to me. What it means is it's £6,600 per person. So we've got a family of 5, so that means it's £33,000 for our family. Well, we don't probably spend much more than that on bits and pieces in the year. So £33,000 a year is has been created on our behalf, and that's gone out through every family in the country. So it's just vast, huge amounts of additional money that's been created. Well, so what? You might think that that's inflationary, but there hasn't been a whole load of retail price inflation. So what's the problem? What's happened is that it was given to rich people and to financial institutions, people who are much more likely to invest the money than to spend it. So there has been a huge amount of inflation in the investment markets, but not in the retail markets. And just like throwing a bucket of milk over the floor, it's gone into every nook and cranny of the investment world. So what this means is that almost all asset values have increased. I think a really good example is the American stock market, where you can see over the last 100 years it's gone up and down, but more recently inflation has made it increase. But I think the key thing is the American stock market is twice the level it was in 2008. Now that's not twice the level at the bottom after the crisis in 2008, it's twice the level it was at the peak in 2008. So we had the mother of all bubbles, and the American market is now twice what it was at the peak of that bubble. And I think that is just an amazing thing to understand. And it means there is significant risk that there is another bubble in that market. And that is replicated in most asset markets. And what we seem to have is two conflicting things. We've got this money printing, which is creating inflation and inflationary environments, but the markets are also worried about deflation. So the inflation is represented by these potential bubbles, but very high prices for stocks and shares. But also if you take, for example, gold is at, in sterling terms, is at a record high, and in most currencies is at record high. So you've got all this potential inflationary things, and the markets are thinking that inflation is important. But right at the same time, they also think that deflation is going to happen. So inflation is when prices increase, deflation is when prices decrease. Now, the governments can't really afford to have prices decreasing, because if you decrease prices and they owe huge amounts of money, which all governments own huge amounts of money, if you owe lots of money and there's deflation, you've got to give that money back in more valuable currency. Almost all governments would be bankrupt with deflation, so they can't afford deflation. So that we have all this potential inflation. The reason I'm talking about deflation as well is because if you look at the prices of government bonds, and government bonds, or money that is owed to the government, is one of the big key asset classes. If you look at the values of government bonds, then they are most certainly predicting deflation. So normally with interest, what happens is you put money in a bank or you lend money to somebody and they give you interest. For a number of countries, when you lend the government money, then they charge you interest for the privilege of lending the money. So we've got negative interest rates. So if you look at the government debt for Japan or Switzerland or Germany or Netherlands, all the best credit risk countries, then there's actually negative interest. So if you lend the money, you'll get less back at the end of the loan. The very low and negative interest rates that we're experiencing at the moment, both in this country and overseas, have never been experienced before. We're in completely uncharted territory. And they are suggesting deflation. So what we have is this conflict where there's a whole load of stuff that's suggesting inflation, and at the same time we're also predicting deflation. So which is it? How can you have both inflation and deflation at the same time? The only way I can see that this can be squared is that the markets are sort of expecting there to be a deflation where prices come down, and then the governments to react, because governments cannot afford to have deflation because they're bankrupt, so they'll react by creating even more money. That'll create inflation, and then we'll have deflation followed by inflation. So in the next video, what I'll look at is how you protect yourself with the definitely uncertain times and maybe gyrating markets that are going to take place as the conflict between inflation and deflation is played out. Thank you for watching, and if you want to watch the second video now, then please click on the link in the description below. Thank you.